All right, we are live on YouTube.
I now call to order the 414th regular planning commission meeting at 7:04.
Oh, there we go. No,
Okay, good.
no.
Will the clerk please take roll call?
Commissioner Brennan. Commissioner Dawson.
Here.
Commissioner Everly.
Here.
Commissioner Wagner. Oh, yep, sorry, it needs to be verbal.
You're muted, Leroy.
I was clicking in the wrong place. I'm here.
Excellent. Commissioner Risley,
Present.
and Commissioner Alvarado has asked the excuse today. We have a quorum.
Wonderful. Did anyone submit a public comment in advance?
We received no public comments in advance and there are no attendees. But also Commissioner Brennan has joined.
Didn't you have possibly yes. We had an excused absence, but was that covered? Okay, that's all right. I'm not tracking over here.
So then we're good to move on to the consent agenda.
Mhm.
Although would the chair like to take over now?
Well, I've been having, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I've been having problems getting in. I was watching all of you, but I guess I wasn't totally in. Sure, do I hear a motion to accept the consent agenda?
So moved. Wagoner here.
A second?
Second, Rice.
Let's all vote. Aye.
Aye.
All right, it passes. So let's move in now to the regular agenda. Mr. Ricard.
Sure, thank you. So recently, we have the governor signed into law, House Bill 1337 relating to accessory dwelling units. Essentially what this new law, when it goes fully into effect, will require that jurisdictions allow accessory dwelling units up to 2 units per lot in all zoning districts that allow for single family residential. So that would be in addition to the primary residence. I've provided an outline of what that means based on the law. So you can see you have one attached accessory dwelling unit and one detached accessory dwelling unit is an option. You could have 2 attached accessory dwelling units. There could be 2 detached accessory dwelling units, which may be comprised of either 1 or 2 detached structures. So they could be separate structures on the property. We must permit them to be allowed as units within detached or within a principal unit. We have to allow, we can't basically put any restrictions on them that are any different than what you would require of a single family home. So we've got some provisions in our current ADU codes right now that have height restrictions measured at the eave, where under, we don't have height restrictions other than an overall height of 35 feet for a single family unit. So that's a provision that we would have to change. There's a provision in there that we can't, any of our capital facility charges for water and sewer can't exceed 50% of what we charge for a single family connection charge for water and sewer, which is very interesting. So we won't bring this before the planning commission, but we will have to bring an adjusted rate structure to the council for the connection fees. We do have an adjustment in our current fee schedule for encouraging smaller units that are 600 square feet or less. So we're actually pretty unique in that way. I don't think a lot of jurisdictions have adjusted rate structures. Walla Walla, when we heard of that, they were like, oh, maybe we should consider doing it. So there's a number of changes that Greg is working on incorporating into our current development standards. There's another provision that you see later towards the end relating to whether or not we can require parking for these additional units. Currently, we require one additional space per ADU. But under the new provisions, if there is a, how to put it, I want to say they say mass transit or something like that.
Within a half mile.
Within a half mile. I did reach out to our to Basin Disposal, not Basin Disposal. I reached out to our Valley Transit.
Same thing.
And Valley Transit says that from their review of what the triggering requirements are, our transit service does not qualify as like a mass transit because we don't provide services. Our current pickup is like every half an hour, where according to the way the law is written, it would need to be at least every 15 minutes on a fixed route for up to at least 5 hours during the service hours, in the service days. So I think we still can require parking for each dwelling unit. Greg is here, Greg Dorn, our planning consultant. Greg, was there anything that you would like to add, or would you like to share what you've been working on, your draft?
Or you're muted, Greg.
I can certainly pop it up on the screen if you think that would be helpful, John.
Yeah, I mean, I think just to run through it real quick and kind of show them we'll see the changes, because you probably have track change on.
Yeah, so how do I get to share? Oh, right there. And so let me see if I, where, there it is right there. And let me get it. So members of the commission, this is a work in progress, and at your next meeting, we'll share this with you, and you'll note that there's some of the potential changes will be highlighted and underlined in strikeout version, and there also will be some comments in the margin that are to kind of help flag things that we want to discuss, or that to also help us not to forget some things. So as John noted, the purpose of the law is to expand housing options by easing the barriers to the construction and use of accessory dwelling units. Some of planning commissioners will remember that, allowing except one accessory dwelling unit is a recent change to the city code, and now the state law says that the city must allow up to 2 accessory dwelling units where single family residences are permitted. So there'll have to be some minor changes to the table of permitted uses. But as we scroll down, you'll remember, and you'll get a chance to study this prior to your next meeting, the regulations right now start broadly talking about accessory buildings and structures, and then have more specific provisions that relate to dwelling units. So much of the general provisions will remain intact. But then we'll start to see the effect of some of the changes. There was a provision in the code right now that says that there still needed to be at least 5 feet of rear yard setback in the case of a detached accessory dwelling unit, and the state law says that they can go back to the rear property line, except in instances where the city is routinely plowing the snow in the abutting alley. So you'll see a change there. John mentioned one, and commissioners, you will remember this because we discussed this at length previously, and there were 2 parts to this, and it had to do with trying to maintain a higher level or a heightened sense of privacy while allowing for accessory dwelling units that could be in a shop or above a shop or a garage and the like. And the state law now says that you can't establish a height limit less than 24 feet unless it applies to the primary residence too. And you don't have regulations that limit houses to 24 feet. So there will need to be some changes there. And the law says that you can't impose design standards specific to accessory dwelling units. They have to be applicable to all housing. And so the language that you had worked on regarding the orientation of windows will likely have to be struck. Parking is another item that John mentioned. It may be that none of these criteria apply, or they only apply in limited circumstances, but things could change over time. So we may need to add some of this, but as a practical matter, it may not go into effect. And the one that am not entirely sure about that we're kind of contemplating right now, but you may recall that there was some, we spent a lot of time talking about lot coverage requirements and how to deal with accessory dwelling units on lots and the coverage requirements. And the language is not entirely clear in the state law, but it looks like there may need to be some changes to the coverage requirements. And it may end up raising a question, Planning Commission, for your consideration as to whether the whether this might be the time to eliminate the lot coverage requirement and simply rely on setback requirements and building separation requirements. So we are still going to have to think about that one quite a bit.
And Greg, when we look at that, we also need to look at the language. That part of the code that talks about, lot coverage, because it also references, density. And so we need to make sure that we're not contradicting ourselves. I think there's a provision that says it's like the lot coverage is not factored in as long as the density and setbacks and so on and so forth are being met. But anyhow, we'll have to take a closer look at that.
Yep.
And then one of the things that is not clear to me is our zoning code right now allows duplexes in all of our single family zone. It's one zone. So does that mean that you could potentially have a duplex and 2 ADUs on the site for a total of 4 dwelling units on a site?
Well,
I don't think the law is very clear about that.
Yeah,
So,
and I think we might be okay on that, John, but that's one of the, disadvantages of new legislation is that it hasn't gone through a couple of iterations and people haven't fleshed out, the where the things are clear and where they're not. It's like I was gonna say it's an old saying, but I know it's one that I made up, so it's not that old. But I remind myself that the first person down the path in the morning gets all the cobwebs in their face. Now there might be some, you get out there before anybody else, you get to see things before everybody else, but you may have to be brushing some things out of your face. That's the price you pay. And so we might be running into some of the issues, ahead of others on this, but ultimately they'll get sorted out.
I saw Randall's hand raised.
Yeah, I was gonna say, is there any questions from commissioners or anything? Otherwise, we will get you a draft of this that's a little bit cleaner than it is right now, when we can start collectively to ponder and think about how to deal with this.
so I did have a question first. Is there an effective date or is it all immediate? Is it already in existence, I guess?
Yeah, we actually have until when the city completes its next state mandated update of its comp plan and development regulations. So I think it has until 2026. But the mayor and city administrator have indicated that given some of the severe housing shortages in the community, they'd really like to have some recommendations from the planning commission this year. So that's where we'll have we'll help blaze the trail.
All right. So the other question was, is there a definition of accessory dwelling unit? And part of what I'm thinking that if somebody's building, that they could build, I thought would be a triplex now on a single family residence. But could they be basically 3 units of the same size, or is there a definition as to the size of what an accessory dwelling unit is, or does it need to be smaller than the main house or anything like that?
There is some provisions in the state law, and let me see if I can find those. If not,
I think for the gross floor area of the accessory dwelling unit, you can't put a restriction on it that requires the units to be less than 1,000 square feet. So you could put requirements on it. They would have to be at least 1,000 square feet allowed.
You're right.
yeah, and there are some definitions in the state law. Let me see if I can get, in the board docs, if I can figure out how to get back to board docs. I think
So, in terms of terminologies, the city staff, the building department and planning department are being very careful about how we use the language duplex or triplex or ADU. And in particular with a lot of the older homes that have these basement apartments. We were kind of loosey-goosey with the terminology and we say, if it was a 2-unit building, we call it a duplex. But in actuality, the building codes have very different requirements for fire separations for duplexes and triplexes and fourplexes and things that are like apartment buildings, things of that nature, than they do for ADUs. The last code cycle, the 2018 code that went into effect, essentially eliminated these fire separations between the primary residence and the ADU, these basement apartments or things that are, you know, attic conversions, whatnot, or even separation between like a garage with a unit above it, the separation requirement is the same as if they were a duplex or whatnot. So we're being careful about how we use that terminology. I don't know how it's gonna all play out in terms of, I do think it's gonna be possible to have, the way that I'm reading the code here, you could potentially have what looks and feels like a triplex, but is actually not built to a multifamily triplex code. It's a single family home with 2 attached accessory dwelling units.
So would that mean no sprinkler systems required?
Right.
Wow. And it also means that it could be one connection for sewer and for water.
Well, we still have, there might be one pipe that everything's flowing through and out to the street, but we still will be able to capture our capital facility charges. They would have to be at a reduced rate, at least 50% of what the single family unit would be charged at.
Is that how they do it now? No.
No, right now it's only $500 for water and sewer for units that are 600 square feet or less.
Okay.
But in terms of actually how the plumbing is run, there are some code provisions. For instance, like with a duplex, I think in general speaking terms here, you can't run your waistline from one unit underneath the other one and then go out, and they can't tie together inside the building. With an ADU, you likely could tie those utilities together. You can't tie the water and sewer together, but you can tie them. So.
Other
Thank you.
questions, commissioners? Like I said, we'll bring you back a first markup at the next meeting, and we'll flag some of the things in the margins for discussion. And one of the things we've already kind of touched upon is something might seem to be relatively straightforward or somewhat innocuous, but when we get into the details, we might find that it starts to unravel a number of things, and we'll just have to be mindful of that. John, it looks like there might be some other hands raised.
Yeah.
I had one here, is pertaining to the density. You talked about setbacks and dwelling separations. And especially if they do away with lot coverage, percentage of the lot coverage. But I think the parking one's the big one that we often run into. And I think we will, if we're gonna visit this anytime soon, have to get some clarification. They call it a major transit stop, and that's what you're referring to.
Yeah, and if you look at the item 3, I think in the major transit stop, it says require more than 2. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm looking wrong. Where are they? Yeah. Well, anyhow, in looking at it, you have to have, in order for it to qualify as a major transit stop for our type of bus system that we have fixed routes, so we qualify there. but we don't, provide service at 15-minute intervals. Ours are at 30-minute intervals. So in order for that bus route to qualify as a major transit stop, it has to be at that 15-minute interval. For, I think, 5 hours during the
Yeah.
busiest day of 5. Yeah. So presently, we don't qualify. Now, you know, in 10 years, if LA Transit ridership grows, they may increase their stops, you know, to that 15-minute service. And then that would trigger this. So I think what Greg was saying, that we might have that, we'll probably have those transit requirements in there. So that we don't have to come back or get caught, you know, off guard later down the road when the service changes and we'll be aware that we can or should reduce the parking requirements.
Okay.
And John, another example of something that this legislation, we might have to just tighten up the language a bit, because I think we say something now like an ADU, you have to provide one additional parking space. Well, what if there's already a 3-car garage, for instance, on the site? Is it still one additional parking space, or do we need to rewrite it to say there must be 2 parking spaces for the primary residence and 1 additional parking space for each approved ADU? So we might have to tighten up the language because the context is changing.
Commissioner Averly, with a question. John, have you put any preliminary thought to how these roll down changes could potentially be abused by builders or private homeowners? I know it's still early and we have some time to think about it, but I guess that's my only concern, especially if the language is relatively ambiguous as to duplexes versus triplexes versus single family with ADUs attached.
I don't think that there's always room for someone to always figures out a way around the code or flies under the radar. I mean, it happens. I mean, we're a college town. We every year we are finding units that have been, you know, in existence for decades, you know, and so they just, you know, they turn up every now and then. Sometimes they go away for a long time and then pop back into use. And I think that the code, the actual law has a very good definition section. So I don't think we're going to run into any sort of ambiguity or about what somebody is trying to do in terms of, I mean, if somebody wants to put 3 units on their property and there's no reason to make them go through or for us to apply the triplex codes if they are actually just doing that. It's a single family home and 2 accessory dwelling units. I mean, I don't see any reason why we would want to, you know, put somebody through the ringer because the city thinks it's a triplex. I think that's one of the reasons why this law has been written in such a way is that they're trying to reduce some of the barriers for creating a more affordable housing product. Because the honest God truth is that every 3 years, the building codes keep ratcheting up the standards and, you know, and it's mostly done in terms of fire, life and safety. And then of course, the environment with the energy codes, which I'm not saying are bad, but there is a reality to all of it. And it is driving up the cost of housing. It is a big factor in that. In addition to, you know, some people may have an opinion about the Growth Management Act and that also driving up the cost of housing, or, you know, how the county manages the UGAs and so on and so forth. So there's multiple factors involved here. And so this is the governor, the legislature's attempt at alleviating that. And for good or for bad. So I'm not too worried about somebody trying to get around the codes, because the law, I think, is basically reducing the standards is what it's doing, in my opinion.
Well, and some of those standards, there's a finite return on investment of what the, you know, but with life safety, you're not getting a huge return on that massive investment of increasing life with fire sprinklers and some of those other things.
Yeah, and you know, and I'm not an expert on when fire sprinklers are triggered, but a lot of it, I think in our code has to do with the square footage. So I think where our threshold is 4,000 square feet, and there might be a unit
Triplex.
trigger there, and he's done a significant amount of research into that area but so, yeah.
John, I can see one potential loophole that could be exploited. And I think you and I should talk about it, but I don't think I should advertise it. Hey, everybody, how about this? But with any legislation, there's always going to have to be some monitoring and some evaluating and some fine tuning. And so I think the intent of this is clear. But the evil side of me has come up with at least one loophole I can see.
You could get the attendance to come up each month if you put more of those in.
Developers watching.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We'll hint to it next time.
Stay tuned. All right, any parting questions before we move on to the next topic?
Randall has his hand up, but I'm not sure if it's on purpose.
No, it was from the last time. I guess I didn't lower my hand.
No worries.
Okay,
You need a motion.
No.
John, you want to go to SEPA categorical exemptions?
Yeah, Greg, why don't you take the lead on this, since I think you've probably done more research on it than I have.
Sure. The Planning Commission, you may recall that the Washington State Environmental Policy Act requires that before the city takes action on a wide range of items, most notably on different types of development permits and approvals, we're required to identify and consider the potential impacts on the environment before a decision is made. Now, the legislature over time has created 28, 29, 30 different categories of exemptions where they said, this is a decision that the city needs to make, and it's not subject to going through and having to prepare a SEPA checklist and making a SEPA threshold determination before the city takes action. Some of them, kind of makes, some sense. They're, have to do with, things like decisions of the court, for instance, and the like. But one of the categories of exemptions is identified as minor new construction. And over time, the legislature has given cities and counties a degree of flexibility to define what constitutes minor new construction. And at one time, minor new construction was identified as things like the construction of up to 4 housing units. And then more recently, it was raised to the level of up to 9 single-family dwelling units. And a city could just set it anywhere between 4 and 9 and say, if it's below this threshold, don't have to prepare a SEPA checklist. and we don't have to make a SEPA threshold determination. Still has to get a permit, still has to meet all of our permitting requirements and the like. And many of the requirements may be designed specifically to avoid or minimize environmental impacts. But like I said, over time, the trend has been to raise the exemption levels or to create a wider range and let cities decide where what's best for them. So this past year, the legislature raised the levels again and have said in the case of constructing single family residences, you can now set the threshold anywhere up to 30 new dwelling units.
Wow.
They've said you can now exempt the construction of up to 200 multifamily dwelling units. It used to be 0, but now they've said you can exempt up to 200. In the case of a barn or farm equipment storage, they've said you can now go up to a building up to 40,000 square feet from 30,000 square feet. And in the case of things like offices, schools, retail buildings, parking garages, you can now go up to 30,000 square feet and 90 parking spaces. And finally, with respect to filling and grading, you can go up to 1,000 cubic yards. So this allows, doesn't require, but they've said you now have greater flexibility than you've had before. Several cities have already jumped in and have addressed that. And City of Walla Walla is one of them. And Walla Walla has raised the threshold for exemptions on single family residences from 9 up to 14. They could have gone all the way up to 30. They said 14. There's an exemption that's difficult to understand. The law isn't very clear, but the intent, I believe, is that if you have a subdivision of small houses with each house less than 1,500 square feet, you could go up to 100, exempt up to 100.
Well,
I haven't seen a city adopt that yet. Walla Walla did not, Spokane did not, as examples. So that one's kind of a little bit unusual. Multifamily, Walla Walla has said that they will exempt from SEPA, still have to meet code requirements, but up to 60 multifamily dwelling units, 60 in Walla Walla are now exempt. Walla Walla raised the exemption on barns and storage buildings and the like. Let me just make sure that I'm saying that correctly.
They're less than what our standard is. We have 30,000 square feet currently, and Walla Walla only raises.
Is at 10, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, they've kept it where it was. And they Walla Walla increased their commercial exemption to 30,000 square feet and 90 parking spaces. It's a good sized parking lot. And finally, on fill and grade, College Place is at 200 yards for the exemption. Walla Walla went up to the maximum of 1,000 cubic yards. So, and so Walla Walla's experience, I think, is similar to other cities. I haven't seen many that have gone up to the maximum level, but somewhere between where they are today and the new level, they've bumped them up a bit. There's an argument to be made as to how significant increasing the exemption is. Some folks will say, particularly in the building and development community, that having to prepare a SEPA checklist and having to go through the SEPA process does in fact add time and money to the development process. Others will argue that whether you have to do a SEPA checklist or not, you still have to comply with the regulations and make sure that your facility is properly designed and that you're avoiding and minimizing adverse impacts. And the SEPA requirements aren't that big of a deal. And so, we can argue that up one side and down the other. But there is a provision now in the state law that gives the city some more flexibility. And in an area like the Walla Walla Valley, I think a strong argument can be made that there would be a benefit to having some consistency between jurisdictions, because builders tend not to only build in one jurisdiction or another. And you may find a builder or developer, if they're building in Walla Walla, they're likely building in College Place. They're likely building in the unincorporated county just outside of the urban growth areas, and that it would make some sense to have some consistency between the jurisdictions. And so you might want to start our discussion at the next meeting by kind of once again looking at where is College Place today, what has Walla Walla already done, and what options has the new law opened up to the city, so we can have that discussion. And commissioners, you can help figure out where the sweet spot is for College Place.
Was all this initiated, all these changes? Kind of seems strange whenever anything slides a little bit more lenient than, because it seems like it generally goes the other direction. Was it all based on affordability? Is that why these changes are being made? Or
That
what's
seems to be driving a lot of changes that are being passed and being considered, is a recognition that there's got to be some relief somewhere.
Yeah.
Well, and also I would add that over the last, since we started doing planning, the development standards have increased, right?
Yep.
And so I think we've gotten to a point at all levels of government where the bar is pretty high. Except maybe in some rural areas where they, aren't falling underneath the GMA maybe. And so we rely less and less on the SEPA process to condition a development. We still use it for larger developments for things like determining what the impacts on traffic mitigation possibly. We relied on it heavily with the Homestead development to develop a per cap, basically a per dwelling unit charge to assess on their traffic mitigation. And so they contributed roughly $250,000 towards the traffic signal at Whitman, where their proportional share of that, but we would not have been able to require them to do that without SEPA. It was a condition of the SEPA approval that we did what we call it a mitigated determination of non-significant. So we mitigated through some things. And so that's the one side of it that I see as, let's say if we went the extreme and said, you were going to allow up to 200 multifamily residential units. Well, that's a pretty significant impact of the potential there. And so we need to be able to say, well, you need to provide us with a traffic impact analysis, and we want these intersections looked at, and then we can say, well, there's, in 20 years, because of your development, you're going to put that intersection at a service level of F, and these are the things you need to do to, your proportional share of that. And we can come up with either a fee that they pay, or maybe there's a fix that they do, but without SEPA, or having a really high standard in place for traffic mitigation in your development code, that's another option. But we're not there yet. I think what Walla Walla is in the process of, and maybe is they are looking at impact fees for like traffic. As opposed to relying on, requiring a developer to do a traffic study. Which, is expensive. I think they've hired a consultant to basically do an analysis of what it would look like if every dwelling unit was assessed with fee, at permitting. And just, then they could allocate those resources where it's necessary. So.
Commissioner Brennan?
Yeah, so that's, you kind of went down, John, some of what I was gonna say, that we may have to look at, or the city would have to look at potentially being more prescriptive on some regulations that now it's more to SEPA a mitigation. So I was thinking, if you're building next to a creek, part of mitigation might be that some restoration or some other aspect that then now without SEPA, you don't have that, those
Well,
findings.
There are some exemptions, so if you're developed, let's say we've moved our threshold for single family residential units up to what Walla Walla did at 14 units. But let's say Garrison Creek runs through that property. Well, then you will have to still get a biologist and do a critical area, analysis. You will, and that part of that process requires a SEPA checklist. So there's still certain times where you might qualify at face value for the exemption, but because there's a steep slope or there's a creek on your property, you would still have to go through it.
Hey, John, Commissioner
Yeah.
Brenniso is making a really, really good point, because the state legislation says if you raise any of these thresholds, part of the adoption process is you have to make a finding that your development regulations that govern that type of development are up to date and adequate. So using the example of, say, multifamily, if there becomes a new exemption for whatever the level of multifamily residential development in College Place, if that's a new exemption, one of the consequences is we'd have to review the multifamily regulations and share with the commission our thoughts as to whether the regulations as written are adequate, or if it triggers, maybe we need to have some more specific language about traffic studies or something like that, move away from critical areas. But we do have to go on the record as saying these thresholds are being raised because our regulations are adequate.
Yeah, good point.
The other point that maybe Commissioner Brennan or John that you made is one of the benefits of SEPA. I think there's a couple of benefits to SEPA. One is because it exists, it provides an incentive for builders and developers to design their projects to avoid or minimize adverse impacts, because they know that the process goes a heck of a lot faster and a lot smoother if that's what they do. So it does have a built-in incentive, but the other real big advantage of SEPA is that it creates an opportunity for other jurisdictions that might be affected by a project, gives them the opportunity to go on record and say, but what about the impacts on us? And so as an example, what if, for instance, Walla Walla had said, we're going to exempt multifamily residential developments up to 200 units from SEPA, And what if there's starting to be development proposals right around the boundary between Walla Walla and College Place? Walla Walla might say, well, that's fine by us, but if, the question would be, is there a way to make sure that the impacts in College Place are being addressed? And it doesn't become a way of shifting impacts onto others. Now, the same thing can apply back to College Place, and Walla Walla would say, well, when you guys set your exemptions, don't forget that these things could have an impact on us too. So it ends up being an argument to make sure that cities and the counties work together when they're permitting projects near their boundaries or that can have impacts that cross over political lines.
Good point. Any last questions on this? Obviously, we're gonna have to bring more back to you on this topic. Any thoughts on actually, what's the temperature out there, just in general? Would the commission like to keep things kind of where they're at, or maybe bump them up a little bit to where Walla Walla's at? I wouldn't be too concerned about from the excavation, bumping that standard up to 1,000. Personally or professionally, I guess. Looks like Ben has his hand up.
Someone else had mentioned it, I think you did, John. One of the motivating factors, and it's not a huge thing to consider, but I think there is some continuity there between the two cities, which is enjoyable for people who are working across the board, not so lurchy, unless there's a huge reason we don't want it at 1,000 cubic yards. I mean, unless there's something unique to our soil versus theirs, or the slopes. I think that's a great example of something that we could streamline that, take their lead, maybe find out why they chose that, if it makes sense, adopt it. Yeah.
I'd kind of second that, small sandbox, fewer discrepancies, easier to display. And as a general rule, I'm more in favor of less restrictions than more. There are exceptions.
So my opinion is that we should be somewhat similar to Walla Walla, since we're really basically the same community in a sense. But at the same time, putting the hat that I used to wear of a city engineer, I think we need to then potentially again review our regulations to make sure that then we may need to prescribe some things to make sure that there are no unintended consequences. For instance, I can see on this grading and excavation, I could have consequences on the neighbors based on rainfall patterns and where the water goes and things like that. So I mean, there's a lot of different things that we need to make sure that if we take it off the table, there's something in the code that still requires you to check on certain things, or that there's some prescriptive regulations.
Yep. So we'll bring at the next meeting, or prior to the next meeting, we'll have a draft that also is in, underline and strikeout version, and we'll have some comments in the margin, and we'll either have the Walla Walla thresholds in the text with a note off to the side that said it could be up to this, or we'll have the maximum in the text and then put Walla off to the side. But one way or another, you'll be able to see, here's what it is today. here's the maximum it could be, and here's where Walla Walla ended up. And then if there's any other information that we think might be relevant, we'll add that in, but that'll be a good place to start the discussion. And then, and as we go through it, we'll keep an eye on the regulations and standards behind them and start to see if we spot any any areas that need to be shored up because of that. Okay,
Okay,
John, I have a family matter that I need to attend to, so I'm wondering if we could hold the no net increase discussion to the next meeting.
yeah, that's fine. Thank you, Greg.
You bet. Thank you very much. And we'll, I'm going to sign off. We'll see you next week.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Rick.
Next time.
You bet. Thank you.
Okay, in reports, just real quick, I have a couple of different sections that are, the countywide planning policies. The cities of Walla Walla, College Place, Waitsburg, and the county, got together. We ended up with 3 proposals. We evaluated those proposals for the consultant to help us guide us through the update process. And we selected LDC, and Watershed, their submittal of the combined proposal. Watershed and LDC have both worked in the valley. They've done work, LDC has done work, I believe, for both, my memory serves me correct, with both for Walla Walla and the county of Walla Walla. And as has the Watershed, they've both worked for each jurisdiction, and both jurisdictions have been very happy with their work. So we've been in discussions with them. The county's the lead agency, so they're negotiating a contract right now with LDC. And hopefully that will get finished up and awarded, and then the process can begin. It's probably going to be a year-long process, so it's probably going to drag into next year. No other information to share on that, but if you want to see their proposal, go ahead. It's in the board docs there under reports, their document. It's interesting. You'll kind of see what their plan is to work us through it. And I think they're going to do a very nice job for us.
Nice.
Any quick questions about that? So the countywide planning policy update.
It's long overdue.
There it is. We're all halfway through this year almost.
I didn't realize, if I understood it correctly, it's been 30 years since the last one was done.
Yeah, there was a tweak done in the early 2000s, some real minor adjustments to that.
I'm excited for the future of our valley.
Yeah, I think once we get through that whole process, we are all going to have a better feel for what our needs are in the valley in terms of land and growth and all that.
When this LVC company basically hears all the different parties and sides, then they put together a proposal that everyone has to agree on, or in other words, no, whatever they say, we've hired them, it's done.
Yeah, I mean, both the cities of Walla Walla and the county we're jointly a third responsible for the cost. So the county is the lead agency, but they're working for us, and there's stakeholders involved. And the planning commissions will have an opportunity to review it and comment on it. And of course, the public's going to be involved. So I think it's going to be a very inclusive process.
Oh, good.
And, ultimately, I mean, the end goal is that we are all, happy with the end results and want to approve it. And of course, each jurisdiction will have to approve it separately. So. Yeah, we're very hopeful that we're gonna end up with a product that everyone's happy with. Anybody from the remote has any questions, comments? Okay. Just real quick, I'll run through since we are over an hour now. Development activity, just Lions Park is moving along. We are at 99.9% on the engineering plans for that project. So that's the splash pad, walking paths, dredging the pond, separating the creek from the pond. Exercise equipment around the quarter-mile walking paths, lighting in the park, new turf sod in the infield, new playground, splash pad, we're eliminating the stormwater that's collected off of everything south above the park, that all this stormwater goes into the pond untreated. We have a huge grant from the Department of Ecology that's putting in this big storm facility underneath the parking lot. It's, big project, and the permitting was horrendous.
I'm glad.
But Anderson Ferry has done a great job for us and has stayed on top of the feds and the state agencies that are reviewing our application. And so I have some sympathy for the private sector out there. So we are shooting to go out for bid at the end of this month or first part of next month. There's still one little permit that we're still ironing out before we're able to get there, but pushing hard.
When will that go to construction then?
Well, it would go to construction hopefully this summer.
Oh.
We were hoping to be out for bid several months ago, because obviously late spring is not a great time to be bidding public project or any project, because all the contractors are usually tied up and geared up on other jobs. So,
Right.
But we're keeping our fingers crossed. Burger King down at what is that? Morrison, near the Hapo Credit Union. That project is alive again. It's under a different franchisee than what we were looking at a couple of years ago. They've submitted engineering and so civil plans and building plans. They're still in first round review at the city level. But that project they're anxious to get their permits and get rolling, as they want to have that project completed before the end of the year. So that's exciting, and that will be an additional commercial project in town. Chipotle is under construction down there at the old Chase Bank site. There is an additional tenant site in that building that they've sectioned out. We don't have a tenant lined up for that yet. The soda stop down at Meadowbrook Plaza they're having their grand opening, I believe, tomorrow. And that's a new business in town. It's, I guess, custom sodas. So that's exciting. I think it's a local business owner. And I believe they've got their certificate of completion. I think they were shooting for Monday and they ran pickups, but so nice local business. Go down and support it when they open up, please. And then subdivisions, we have the Deer Meadows on Southwest 12. That's a 12 lot or subdivision, short plot or subdivision.
How many again?
I think it's 12 lots. Down on the end of Southwest 12. They have their civil plans are, I think they're basically been approved. I think they have a couple little tiny tweaks to make to the plans, and they resubmitted those and we'll get them stamped. And I'm not sure what the plans are. Jeff Kelly's the developer of the Tri-Cities. And he's not sure if he's going to build it. And then just sell lots, or if he may try to sell it as a preliminary plat with full design and let somebody else build it. I'm hopeful that he'll build it. I think the lots would sell. Their size in that such you could put duplexes on them. So across the street from Deer Meadows is Salerno Estates. It's a project by Mark Neary. It's a 6-lot short plat. They are going to be most of the lots accessed off of either a shared driveway or direct driveway off of Southwest 12th. It's where the 12th Street goes into that kind of rural standard that got approved a couple of years ago with the separated sidewalk and a little kind of storm ditch in between the road and sidewalks, but there's no curb. He'll do the same thing on the south side of the road. And there'll be half-acre lots. They'll be served by water, but it does not work to get gravity sewer to those in that portion of Southwest 12. So they will be permitted to put in septic systems. That's why they're half-acre on public water system. That's the threshold for the county standard. That needs to go through civil design, but they have a preliminary short plat approval. And then the village of the Garrison Creek, phase what is that? 12 and 13. They have civil plan approval. They, I believe, are hoping to get the construction underway in August. That's when they're hoping to begin. They would put all of the underground infrastructure in both phases, and then the phase, I think, closest to Larch, they would get the road in and all the other improvements so that they could final plat that first phase. There's still CCNRs and things like that they need to work through with there's some access questions that were raised during the public hearing section by the other phases in that development, and whether or not there's access onto Garrison Village Way and some other things like that.
Who's developing that?
That's a good question. The property was Phase 5 Development, I think was the name of the LLC that recently sold to a LLC called Many Waters. And I'm not entirely sure who the ownership structure is of that. Other than I've been told that Doug Bottomer is still, I guess I'm not sure, he's acting as the developer of so he's still in communications with the civil engineering firm that's in charge of doing the design and stuff, so. But I don't really fully understand at this point what the makeup is of the ownership. Sure. And then the Vesper Apartments across on College Avenue, that's under construction. And that's that 24-unit 3-story structure going on College Avenue. The things seem to be moving along well for that project. Villages at Fort Walla Walla Apartments on Whitman near the water tanks. That application has been revived and it is in civil and actually it's been through first round civil and building comments. We have not received this revised civil plans back. We did receive the revised building plans back on those. I think there's 8 buildings and they were returned. They really didn't address any of our building officials' comments, so they basically got sent back.
How many units are those? There's quite a few.
180 units. They've changed they still have, it's basically the same floor plan, the same layout for the site. They still have a clubhouse with a pool proposed and, like a little bike shop and ski shop for working on your equipment. They've changed the finishes a little bit. Before they were using cement siding products. Now they're proposing vinyl siding. So it's maybe the quality is a little less, it's not as high. But nonetheless, I think it'll help with the, affordable housing. And if that helps them, changing the finished materials helps them hit the market.
Right.
Better, and it's great. And then the last one on the list is Southwest Sixth, Oakwood Apartments. Oh, so there's an Oakwood, there used to be an Oakwood Street. It still exists in our addressing system. Off of Sixth. It was for those that have been around a long time, there was this little cul-de-sac of manufactured homes. They weren't manufactured homes, they were actually trailers. So that's being redeveloped by the Hambies. And I'm blanking on how many units were being proposed in that development. I apologize, but I want to say it was in the, remember, Christie?
They are able to figure out the access in there and out of there.
I think there will be some back and forth because with the property owner on the front side that owns the access to the land with the easement crosses over. I think they'll work through it. I haven't issued the decision yet. We went out and we went through environmental review and public comment. But I have not finished the decision on that project yet. So, and one of those issues is how the easement is being used. There's concern that in order for the developer to meet his parking requirement, I think there's 5 stalls proposed on that access easement. And the owner is legitimately concerned that the way the easement language is written, it's for access and utility, not for parking. Although I think he would like to be able to use it for parking for his vehicles, and so I think it's gonna take some negotiating, I'm sure, with the Hambies and the property owners.
So John, where is this? Sixth and what?
It's across the street from the old Rogers school site.
Oh, okay.
And it's just north of Plant Services, the south property. Butts up against the Plant Services, the university's property,
West of Bay.
west of Bay, yeah.
Okay.
The secondary lot. So those are the kind of highlights of the development activity that's going on. I guess one other thing that's not in the list, but and I think you're all aware that a company out of Post Falls, Lakeside Capital, purchased a Christensen property last year. That's the property that's south of Majonier. Mike McKiernan still owns his section, but they're working on development plans for that 200 acres. It's good. Yeah. Any questions?
Is that section, I should know that, but is that residential and commercial mixed? Kind of a mixed use for that 200 acres? I've just heard so many stories.
Yeah, no, the commercial is all on the McKiernan's piece, the lower part of the McKiernan's piece, south of the creek, for the most part. There's a little bit up at the intersection. There's the potential if they chose to do the master plan development, that they could master plan some mixed use in there or plan in some multifamily into the residential. By utilizing that master plan development, code that you guys approved last year. So there's possibility.
Any more news on Tarragon and the airport?
Actually, yes, we did receive an annexation application for the Martin Airport property. So I'm hoping to introduce that to the council at the next council meeting. So that'll be something to keep your eye on.
Is it for that whole area or just the airport proper area?
The annexation proposal is for the whole area. There are two properties within that are not in ownership of the Tarragon group. So we'll see how the council wants to handle that. Under the annexation laws, if you have 60% of the assessed valuation based on the assessment records, the council can modify the annexation or require inclusion of certain areas within that to be part of it. And I believe that the airport property does have that assessed value that they exceed 60% of the value in the annexation area. So they could make those two properties annexed.
When we met last time, there was, Greg was planning on meeting with them. Did that come out of that particular meeting that they?
We did have a meeting with Paragon, and that's what, basically the end result of that. They showed us some of their conceptual stuff. And the end result of that was, well, let's get you annexed first. And start moving along in that direction. There's still a lot of utility work that needs to happen out in that area in order to make anything happen. But their plan is to preserve the airport. That's still a major part of their plan. And then residential, mostly south of the creek and up on the top of the bluff. So, but yeah, I think there are some areas that might work for. They want to expand their hangars for rental capacity. I guess there's a huge waiting list in the valley for hangar space. So, but before a lot of that can happen, we need to improve the water system out there. And we are working on grants for an elevated water storage, either a tower or a tank out there above the wastewater treatment plant facility. In part to diversify our water, spread out our water system and be more sustainable. Because right now all of our water storage is on the east end of town, and if we were down a well or two, those storage tanks would be depleted within, I think, 4 hours. So we need more storage and spread it out across the country. So. Yeah, any other questions?
A lot more.
Yep, always. The council renovation is moving along. The IT folks are in there now, setting up all the screens and the servers, all the stuff behind the scenes to make the meetings run smoothly. So we're probably still middle of July before we'll take occupancy of the space, but yeah.
The only other question I had, it seems like often the 2 months in the middle of summer, we don't have a meeting. Are we planning on that this year or?
It just depends on how things go. I mean, is that desirable?
Well, we just had 3 months off. Like
Yeah.
I said, I'm ready to retire, but But, so I was just curious as if we were, so.
I don't know. I mean, I don't like to let you guys have too much time off, but sometimes I just cannot get to it all.
Sure.
Even with having Greg, help out, sometimes we can't get it all prepared and out for you guys, so. I don't want to have a meeting just to have a meeting.
Sure. Well, without pizza.
Right? Okay,
So is there any other business that any commissioner wants to bring up? And if not, then do I need to have a motion to close the meeting?
so motion, Commissioner Ricewood. To close the meeting then.
Second?
Second.
All right, so with that, let's call the meeting to a close. And our next meeting date, unless there's any change, is what is it in June, the second,
June 20th.
June 20th? All right, so we'll see you then. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
You.
I'm pretty certain you will not see me that night.
Is that your anniversary or something?
It is. It's my 30th anniversary.
From your high school graduation or your marriage?
Marriage.